Alors bonjour à tous les amis. Aujourd'hui, j'ai le grand privilège et le plaisir de recevoir mon ami américain Trent Horn, qui est un apologète catholique aux États-Unis, un des plus grands apologètes connus dans le monde, qui a dédié sa vie à la défense rationnelle de la foi catholique. Et donc, je vais faire cette interview en anglais parce qu'il ne parle pas français, mais il y aura des options de traduction pour ceux qui ne comprennent pas l'anglais dans un second temps. Vous pouvez aussi toujours traduire avec le logiciel YouTube. Mais voilà, on va faire cette interview en anglais aujourd'hui. So, hi Trent, thank you for coming on this channel, on my podcast. You're one of the greatest apologists in the world for the Catholic Church, and so it's an honor to receive you for my French audience because I'm one of the only French Catholic apologists today. And so it's an honor for us to receive you on this channel and to learn from your experience and all your great work because you started, I think, in 2012, right, for Catholic Answers, and so it's great to have you on this channel so that you can share your experience as an apologist with us. So thank you for coming.
Bonjour, Matthew. Thank you for having me. It is an honor to be on your channel, and I look forward to talking to you about all these important subjects.
Thank you, friends. So when I first discovered your work, it was like in 2018, 2019. I started studying apologetics at the end of 2017. I started discovering William Lane Craig, your work, Jimmy Akin's work, Catholic Answers, and it's really blew my mind away to find out that there was these really good rational arguments for God, for Christianity, and for the truth of the Catholic Church. And it's thanks to you guys that I started writing my first apologetic book that came out in 2022 called Be Rational, Become Catholics. So in French, Soyez rationnels, devenez catholiques. And yeah, so I've been a lot influenced by your work, especially your work on Protestantism. Your book, the Case for Catholicism, really helped me writing my own book. So I wanted to know what is your favorite domain in apologetics, because we know that we could there's a whole section of apologetics dedicated to proving God's existence, another section dedicated in proving the historicity of Christianity, another section consecrated to refuting orthodoxy and Protestantism. You could say another section moral apologetics. So what is your favorite domain of apologetics, or do you like them all the same?
I don't know if I have a favorite domain of apologetics, but the areas that I enjoy the most will be those where I get to use the tools of philosophy. So, in my studies, the first academic field that I really fell in love with was philosophy. I remember taking an introductory college course on philosophy when I was 18 years old, and I really enjoyed the subject and learning how to argue with clarity, how to create positions and statements and arguments with a good use of reason, avoiding logical fallacies. I just really enjoyed that. And so now, when I do apologetics and when I defend the Catholic faith, I really enjoy the areas where philosophy can be put on display. Now, you use philosophy and sound reasoning in every subject of apologetics or defending the faith. But I find, especially when it comes to arguments for and against the existence of God, as well as arguments for and against certain ethical positions, such as the issue of abortion, so called same sex marriage, euthanasia, and assisted suicide, in these particular subjects, one tends to rely on philosophical argumentation more than textual interpretation. So when you're defending the meaning of scripture or engaging Protestants on Catholicism, you're still using philosophy, but you tend to be using other disciplines like textual studies, interpreting the Bible, interpreting the writings of the early church fathers. And I do enjoy all of that. But I really love whenever I can do good philosophy for building up the kingdom.
That's great. So I saw recently that you had William Lane Craig on your channel for an interview, a friendly interview that was nice to see. He even suggested that we stopped baptizing babies, which I found really funny because, yeah, that's not going to happen in Catholicism. But yeah, I think we can admire what he's done for us in philosophy, especially in natural theology. And I've been impressed also by reading his big works on the kalam cosmological arguments, especially in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, which is perhaps one of the best books, book length defense of theism in academia. And so I would recommend that book to anyone who wants to study the kalam in more depth. So, what is your stance on the kalam today? I think from what you've said, you have some little disagreements on Craig's actual infinite argument, but you say you can reformulate it in another way that makes it stronger. So could you please explain to us what you mean by that here?
Yes. So the Kalam cosmological argument is a version of the cosmological argument, which is the idea that the entire universe is evidence for the existence of God. William Lane Craig gave the argument the name Kalam in honor of the medieval Islamic school of theology that propagated this argument. Kalam is an Arabic word that means speak, the idea that God spoke and the universe came into existence. So the Kalam cosmological argument seeks to show from reason that the universe had a beginning in time and that this beginning must be God. So the argument goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. The premise that is most controversial is the second one, that the universe began to exist. So William Lane Craig offers two philosophical arguments to defend that particular premise. Both they rely on the first argument relies on the claim that an actual infinite cannot exist in reality, and a beginningless past is an actual infinite. Therefore, it cannot exist in reality. The second argument says that even if even if an actual infinite could exist in reality, it cannot be formed by successive addition. Therefore, the past could not be infinite since the past is formed by successive addition, one day, one event at a time, one moment of time at a time. There are many objections to this argument. One of them is that if time is not a series of moments that elapse one after another, but rather all moments of time are equally real, called the B theory of time. If that is what time is, then the second argument from successive addition cannot work. I still like that argument, and I am open to the view that time progresses in successive moments. So I'm still in favor of that argument. But I also try to make my arguments for the Kalam by granting my critic as many premises as possible, including the premise that the B theory of time is true and past, present, and future are equally real. The problem for Craig's argument that I find to be insurmountable is that if a beginningless past cannot exist because it would be an impossible collection, an actually infinite collection of events, then an endless future could not exist because there would be the same number, an actually infinite number of events. So I am concerned about that objection called the symmetry objection. So I am not persuaded of that version of the argument. However, newer work from people like Rob Koons or Alex Pruss, I like their scholarship, which has shown that even if the past were beginningless, then causal paradoxes could emerge. There could be all kinds of paradoxical states, actually infinite collections emerging from a beginningless past, for example, or there being causal paradoxes where certain events could elapse into the present that couldn't possibly occur. Things like that. This has been called causal finitism. So my revised Kalam argument would be that the universe began to exist because if the past were beginningless, then paradoxes would be metaphysically possible. But because paradoxes are not metaphysically possible, the past could not be beginningless. It'd be a similar argument as to why one could not travel into the past, why time travel is impossible, because one could engage in paradoxes like kill one's grandfather before he ever met your grandmother. That these types of things just cannot happen because paradoxes don't happen. And that's the same reason a beginningless past could not ever occur, because paradoxes could obtain. So it's a modified version of Craig's argument that I hope can work in making more modest claims. Though I do believe his argument from successive addition can be defended if you defend a particular theory of time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And for those who want to deepen their study of the kalam, I would recommend studying Alexander Proust and Rob Kuhn's Grim Reaper paradox, which is another paradox that tries to show that there's a formal contradiction with an infinite past. And I would also recommend that there's an argument that many people have not studied for the finitude of the past. It's in the one section of Proust's Infinity, Causation, and Paradox book, and it's on the chicken egg paradox. So he says that if the past could be infinite, then you can have an infinite sequence of chicken egg, chicken egg, chicken egg, chicken egg back into the infinite past. And if that were to happen, you could ask the question, well, why do the chickens exist? And the answer to that would be, well, it's because the eggs exist. And then you ask the question, well, why do the eggs exist? And then the answer would be, well, they exist because the chicken exists. And so you have this kind of circular causation. The totality of chickens has has caused the totality of eggs, and the totality of eggs has caused the totality of chickens. And so you get a form of circular causation. And since circular causation is not possible, it follows that this sort of infinite regress, chicken egg, chicken egg, chicken egg, cannot happen infinitely into the past. But if if the infinite past were possible, then nothing would stop you from constructing this infinite causal chain. It's coherent when there's a finite past to have a causal relationship between chicken and eggs, but it becomes incoherent and circular if you add the hypothesis of the infinite past. And so that's the hypothesis we must reject.
So, yes, it's very important for people in these cosmological arguments. And I believe that all of them point towards the existence of God because the alternative explanations tend to involve illogical circular explanations or illogical infinite regresses, neither of which provides a satisfactory explanation for the universe itself.
Yeah, very good. And I could say that even if you grant the possibility of infinite regresses, which we don't grant for other independent reasons, there's another independent cosmological argument called the contingency argument. Leibniz asked, why is there anything at all? That is, that even if there were an infinite causal chain, you would still need to explain the existence of this infinite causal chain. Why is there anything at all rather than nothing? And this brings us to another type of cosmological argument, which is, I think you said it's your favorite argument, the contingency argument. And do you think what kind of version do you defend? Do you defend Alex Prou's version in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, or do you have your own version of the contingency argument? I know you've developed yours in the Answering Atheism, but maybe your views have changed since then.
Yes, I was recently asked by Sean McDowell what is the best argument for the existence of God? And there were two that were really vying for my attention as being the best. One would be the argument from contingency that you've explained, and the other would be the argument from motion that St. Thomas Aquinas defended in his first way of the 5 ways of proving the existence of God. Ultimately, I selected the contingency argument as the best one, but I put Aquinas's argument at number 2. I selected the contingency argument because there are less controversial metaphysical premises to defend. To defend the argument from motion, you also have to defend St. Thomas Aquinas's views about act and potency, which can add more complicated elements to the argument. But I still think it's a very good argument. The contingency argument, though, relies on broad notions of existence that most people accept, that there are things which can fail to exist, i.e., those things that are contingent, and then things which are necessary or cannot fail to exist, those things which are necessary. And so the argument that I give is very similar to the one that I offered in Answering Atheism, based on the work of Stephen Davis and William Lane Craig, which would be the idea that there's really only 3 explanations for the contingent things that we see. Either there is an infinite series of contingent explanations, it explains itself, or is explained by something else that needs no explanation. So, for example, you can think of a chandelier hanging from a ceiling, and you ask, why is it hanging? Even if you had an infinite series of chains, that doesn't explain what's holding the chandelier up, because no chain of its own can hold up the chandelier. So the infinite explanation doesn't suffice. And the idea that it just holds itself up seems rather arbitrary and ad hoc. Rather, something else that does not need to be held up is holding it up. And the same thing can apply to the universe. Now, many times people will take issue with the argument by talking about the universe itself and say, well, maybe the universe just is necessary. And I would say, well, we don't have any good reason to think that. For example, when we consider most other necessary things, it's very difficult to conceive of a world without them. But you could conceive of a universe without our star, without the Milky Way. You could subtract elements of it until you get to absolutely nothing at all. But we can be certain, though, that there are at least collections of contingent objects. There are a collection of contingent things, like things here in my studio or where you're recording, that did not have to exist. We know some contingent things don't exist. So what explains them? You either have to add more contingent things, which deepens the mystery, or you eventually have to get to a regress, invalid circular explanation, or something that truly is necessary. I think, though, that most people, and Alex Pruss in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology raises this as a problem for the Leibnizian contingency argument, saying even if we prove the existence of a necessary cause, how do we know that this is God? How do you get divine attributes? And that's where I think the Thomistic arguments for the existence of God are helpful, when we see that in all things there is an essence, what it is, and existence, that it is. And so for something to be necessary, it would make sense that it's necessary because its essence, what it is simply existence, that it is. That's why it's necessary. And that would lead you back to the Thomistic idea of God being pure actuality, pure being itself, rather than just a being.
A very good response. What is your stance on the problem of evil, and especially on the theistic response of skeptical theism? Do you think this is a good response, or do you think that theists also have to appeal to theodicies?
Right. So when it comes to the problem of evil and suffering, this is a very old argument against the existence of God. And today it takes two forms. One would be a logical argument saying that God and evil or unjustified suffering are logically incompatible. There can be no world where evil and God both coexist. And another argument is an evidential argument saying the existence of certain evils and sufferings in this world make the existence of God very unlikely. So the logical argument takes a much greater claim. And so it tends to be viewed as the weaker of the two arguments, because it's not difficult to come up with a scenario where you have God and you have creation and you have some small amount of evil, that there is a good reason for God to allow that. Even among human affairs, we tolerate evils all the time for greater goods. And so if God is all knowing and all powerful, why can't he do the same just on a greater scale? The evidential problem of evil, though, tries to say, well, even if it is possible, this just seems like the kind of world where God would, where there is no God rather than there is a God allowing this kind of evil. There's just too much evil and suffering. And so there's various responses that Christians and theists give to the problem of evil. One would be theodicy, the term you mentioned before, which offers positive explanations for evil, saying that evil is for this or that specific purpose. The other response is a defense. A defense would just say, even if we cannot offer a positive reason why God allows a particular evil, we can still say evil does not disprove God, because God could have some reason we are not aware of for allowing this particular kind of evil. And that's what's called skeptical theism. And I do think that skeptical theism does play an important role in the argument that we have to say that we are finite and limited human beings, that cannot fully explain the evils around us. But I find that many Christian philosophers and apologists that use this kind of argument, it does ultimately become insufficient. Whereas using a classical theist perspective, where we are arguing not that God is a being that is all powerful and all knowing and created the world, but that God just is infinite being itself, I believe it provides a stronger answer to the problem of evil. Namely, that the argument for evil against God tends to go like this: if unjustified evils exist, then God does not exist. Unjustified evils exist, therefore God does not exist. But one could run the argument backwards in something called modus tollens. And I could say, yes, if unjustified evils exist, God does not exist. But God does exist. Therefore, unjustified evils do not exist. What we see as evil and suffering does have a justification, even if we are not aware of it. So I find that the best reply to the problem of evil is a robust metaphysical demonstration of the existence of God. And this is a similar approach that Edward Feser has taken in his book, Five Proofs for the Existence of God. The Thomistic philosopher Brian Davies takes a similar approach as well. I find that this is a good philosophical approach, though other elements of approaching evil, like skeptical theism and some theodicies, do help to make the response more intelligible. So I find
And
that that approach is the most helpful from my perspective.
and are we as Catholics obliged to grant that if God permits an evil, it is necessarily going to bring about a greater good? Is that de fide for Catholics to believe that?
Well, for something to be de fide, for something to require the assent of faith that it's dogma or revelation, it would require the church to have articulated it in a particular way, such as through an ecumenical council solemn definition, an ex cathedra statement, or through the ordinary and universal magisterium. Now, there are some philosophical statements that have been articulated this way, but there are many philosophical statements that have not been. So, for example, the philosophical statement that God created the universe from nothing in the finite past, that has been solemnly defined at the Fourth Lateran Council, for example. But other definitions of God perhaps have not been. So, saying that God is all good, or that God does not directly create evil or directly will evil. I would say that Catholics, they cannot affirm that. I don't know off the top of my head if that has been solemnly defined or not. It may have been.
Or at
But
least in the magisterium, in the
yes,
ordinary
yeah,
magisterium?
well, I would say in the ordinary magisterium, the catechism does teach about how God is not the author of evil. I think it even uses the phrase not even indirectly, but that God does permit moral and natural evils to exist in his creation that ultimately are the consequence of moral evil that human beings have chosen. That God sees it, he foresees it, but does not directly will it. But you could not hold, for example, that evil exists because God is not powerful enough to stop it or doesn't know how to stop it. A Catholic could not hold a limited process theologian view or the open theist view.
And what is your stance on this recent theodicy that has been developed by certain theologians, which is the what we call the fallen angels theodicy, meaning that in order to explain natural evil, usually Christians in the past have appealed to original sin, saying that from original sin, the whole entire creation became filled with evil, natural evil, and that explains natural disasters, things like that. But we know today through science and evolution that it's very probable that natural evil existed prior to original sin. And so here, the Christian response I find interesting is saying that no, actually, natural evil exists after the fall of the angels, so just after creation. And that explains why there are deficiencies in the laws of natures, earthquakes, tsunamis, things like that. it does not require us to appeal just to original sin. What is your stance on this?
I think it's an interesting theodicy and one that can be pursued. It's one that Catholics are not obligated to hold. The church has not definitively taught many things about the nature of the angelic fall. This tends to be hinted at in scripture rather than explicitly narrated, as the fall of human beings is narrated in Genesis 3. So we don't have as many definitive teachings about it. But I do think that it is an interesting hypothesis and it's worth pursuing. I also think a person could offer a defense of God without attributing natural evil solely to the rebellion of angels who came to serve the devil. One could offer a defense that God willed to create a universe that is good and physical existence is good. However, there is an inherent tension in the existence of physical things that when some physical things increase in their existence, other things must decrease. And that is just a necessary part of a natural order among physical objects that are created. And so God has good reasons for creating a physical world for conscious, embodied, moral creatures to live in, where these types of natural evils will occur amongst these inequalities amongst physical created things. So one could make an argument for the permissibility of God creating the physical world, also borrowing from Leibniz, saying that God is not obligated to create the best of all possible worlds because there is no such thing. That would be like saying trying to write out the highest of all possible numbers. There is no such thing. Rather, God is only required to create a world that is good and reflects his goodness, where he is ultimately sovereign in it and brings greater good from the evils that he tolerates.
Yeah, thanks. And perhaps one last argument in favor of theism that I find really good and perhaps not as well, not as much put forward in academia, to my despair, is the argument from miracles. And I know you've defended some versions of it, like for Fatima and things like that, in some of your presentations. And I think that it's a pity that theists don't appeal to this argument too much because they don't want to get their hands into the I don't know, the evidential aspects of the case, and it's perhaps easier for them to appeal to philosophical principles. But I think that in order to touch more people, I mean, even my grandmother will understand the argument from miracles. She won't understand the modal contingency argument. So
Yes.
perhaps from an effectiveness perspective, I think we could develop very good, rigorous arguments from miracles, like Fatima, Lord, Zaytun, the apparitions of Zaytun, which are very well attested, even more than the resurrection of Jesus. Um, so I think that's Catholics should make the traditional case, like theism only from a philosophical perspective, the historical evidence for Christianity, uh, showing Jesus founded the Catholic Church, and then add a fourth part. And that fourth part would say, well, today we have miracles that confirm the truth of the Catholic faith. For example, Eucharistic miracles confirming the truth of the real presence, and Lord and Fatima confirming things like the Immaculate Conception, because in Fatima, Mary talks about her Immaculate Heart, and in Lord, she presents herself to Bernadette as being the Immaculate Conception. And so we have miracles in a specific religious context that tend to confirm specific Catholic doctrines, and that there's no miracles like this in other religions that specifically confirm a doctrine of that religion. So I think that's we should. Do you agree with this? That we should, as apologists, appeal to these kinds of miracles?
Yes, I tend to be a classical apologist. There is a book edited by Steve Cowan called Five Views on Apologetics, and it presents different ways of defending the faith, different apologetic methods. And there is a slight difference between classical apologetics and evidential apologetics. In that book, William Lane Craig defends the classical view, Gary Habermas defends the evidential view, and they're very similar. The difference is that the evidentialist believes that miracles can directly prove the existence of God, whereas the classical apologist believes that miracles are more intelligible and it's easier to believe in miracles if you already believe God exists. So the classical view would be saying that God helps us to believe in miracles, whereas the evidentialist says that miracles help us to believe in God. And both are correct. They're not mutually exclusive. It really speaks more to the emphases that one would put forward. I personally think that miracles are easier to believe in if one already believes there is an all powerful, all knowing, all good God who sustains the natural order of the universe and can suspend the laws of nature to perform a miracle to give some kind of revelation. So I think that one can offer good reasons for God, but also you can make arguments for God from miracles or even from the large testimonies. The number of testimonies of miracles and supernatural events makes more sense under a theistic worldview than an atheistic worldview, even without having to go through all of the evidence for each specific miracle. So I think miracles can be used to show God exists, but I think more often than not, they're helpful in confirming the Catholic revelation that we have from God.
I agree. That's exactly my method too. So, perhaps one last question. Do you have any advice for Catholics in France to start developing more apologetics? What would you say to a young fellow who's like 20 years old and who wants to become a professional apologist? I'm pretty much like we're like two or three in France doing that full time. So, what would you say? What advice would you give to them?
Well, first, I would say that I am very happy to see French Catholic apologists taking on the mission of defending the faith and spreading Jesus Christ and his church throughout France. France has been called the eldest daughter of the church. It was a Catholic stronghold for many, many centuries. And it is unfortunate to see the collapse of the Catholic Church in France really since the 1950s, though a lot of that can be traced back to the French Revolution. But I am greatly encouraged, and my advice would be to maintain a very firm spiritual foundation. Avail yourselves of the sacraments of daily prayer. Be rooted in a sacramental, prayerful, devotional faith and be rooted in a community that supports your apologetic work. Seek out a spiritual director, seek out priests that support what you're doing, who can guide you, provide spiritual direction, provide accountability for the work that you're doing. So always be rooted in that. And then just read what others have done. We have a lot of resources at Catholic Answers, a lot of resources from apologists in the United States and the Anglophone world. Take what they've done and turn it into resources for other French speaking people and others to use and build on it as much as you can. But pray, read, discuss and dialogue and debate with others and learn from your mistakes. You will make mistakes as you do this. It's okay to make mistakes. It's just not okay to refuse to learn from them. But always keep Christ at the center of what you're doing and ask him to bless the fruit of your apologetic work.
Well, thank you, Trent, for these wonderful advices. We would love to have a collaboration with Catholic Answers in France to take all your material, to translate it in our language, to help French people to discover this beautiful domain of the rational defense of the Catholic faith. And so, thank you for all the great work you've done. Thank you to the other apologists at Catholic Answers, Jimmy Aiken, Joe Heschmeyer, Tim Staples, and Carlo Broussard, all the others. Um, and we look forward to the collaborating with you guys in the future. Do you want to recommend some of your books, perhaps to the French audience who would like to discover the work you've written?
I would recommend my book, Why We're Catholic, and the book you already referenced, The Case for Catholicism, as good places to start. If you would like more of my views on atheism, you can see my work, Answering Atheism, though I may release a revised edition of that or a brand new book on the topic, hopefully in the next few years.
And also check out Trent Horn's Persuasive Pro-Life.
Yes.
This book, I've used it a lot for my own book, La Raison est pro-vie, so reason is pro-life. And so I've benefited from works like Stephanie Gray Corners, Trent Horn, and other brilliant pro-life apologists to bring that in France. So thank you again for this, and it was wonderful having you here.
Thank you and au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you, Trent.